Many of you know that right now we're going through a leadership race for the position of new PM of a new head of the Conservative Party who will become the PM around September time once all the voting is done. And there are a lot of different factors that we're taking into account when we've been covering this. I've not really been keeping up as much as some of the others have, but obviously Callum and Carl seem very eager about Kemi Badenoch, who does seem to be one of the only ones who's actually saying the right things when it comes to cultural issues. And cultural issues are very important. We need to get a handle on immigration. We need to get a handle on what's being taught to our kids in school. We need to start to try and recoalesce around a British identity where we're able to, be proud of our history instead of just being told that we need to feel terribly, terribly ashamed of it constantly.
Well, there's a lot to be proud of as well.
Absolutely there is.
If there's any country that has a claim to being a good moral force in the world, it's probably Britain. We did kind of end slavery, didn't we?
Yes, we've
got no guilt for that.
I will say that we, like every other country, have some missteps in our history, but like you say, we have also an overwhelming amount of positives that we've introduced into the world in the first place. And if you're one of those people from America who thinks America is the best country in the world, you're welcome, because it was established by English people. So there you go right there. But one of the other most important things to talk about when it comes to who's going to be in charge of the country as of September is the economics of this. And we're going to take a look at what some of the things that Rishi Sunak in particular, because sadly, he does seem to be the front runner for the race right now, as much as that really deeply saddens me to say. The little manlet himself might
Rishi,
be in charge.
the money printer.
Yes, money printer go Burr Sunak might be in charge of the country, and it's important to take a look at what he's saying and what his plans are for the economy and what the other people are talking about as well, just in case there is the chance. So before we go any further, I'll just draw your attention to a premium podcast that Josh and I did last month called The Left Does Not Understand Economics. And given that the Tory party are basically leftists, at this point, this applies just as much to them as everybody else. And as we go through this, I've also got some excerpts that I want to read from Henry Hazlitt's fantastic book, Economics in One Lesson, which if you've not read, you should. It's very, very short and a really good introduction to a lot of the concepts that we talk about in stuff like this. So I will be reading that, and hopefully it might inspire you to go off and read that. It doesn't hurt either that Hazlitt is one of the few economics writers who can actually write. So it's one of the few books that you can read on economics that you won't want to die as you're...
They're not that bad.
No, some of them are much better than others. Rothbard actually is able to write as well, but some... I love Mises, but my God, the man was not...
a fair amount, yeah.
The man was not a particularly stirring writer. Same with people like Bomberwork and such. But anyway, let's go on to it. So the latest update as of today, by the time this goes out onto YouTube tomorrow, things will have changed because we've got another round of voting going on today, is that there has been an update in who's in the front running. Tom Tugendhat, who before this was a man I'd never heard of in my entire life, because apparently he was just a senior backbencher.
It does sound like a sort of unusual name that you'd use as like a pseudonym as a spy.
He does sound fake. He does sound made up. And honestly, having seen some of the debates that he was involved with, I've already forgotten what he looks like. So he might just be some kind of mass hallucination that we're all still reporting on somehow. There might be some insanity, there's some shenanigans going on here. But the current runners for the race that will be narrowed down by Thursday to just 2 people who will then have to go through a summer of campaigning before the last vote, and then we'll find out who it is on the 5th of September. So the 4 right now are Rishi Sunak, who's in the lead, Penny Mordaunt, who is, I think, in the runner-up in votes right now, then Liz Truss, and then Kemi Badenoch. And Kemi Badenoch, obviously, is the person that Carl and Callum seem most enthusiastic about. From what I've seen of her, she seems certainly better than the other ones.
Well, she served as Equalities Minister under Boris, didn't she? And then would give loads of excoriating speeches, just like, yes, critical race theory is evil and racist. We need to eliminate it. And under her watch, I think all of the diversity training got banned from being taught in government, even though the civil service then did it anyway.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, she did, although I think one of the things, I still don't really trust her that much, the same way that I don't think anybody should trust any politicians ever. They are people whose entire job is about putting their hand in your pocket, taking all of your money, and then forcing you to do stuff under threat of well, you agreed to this, didn't you? Even though I don't remember signing a contract for any of this. But she has still done things like, I think she approved gender self-ID a few months ago. So there are things that aren't perfect about her.
She's certainly on it with the woke stuff, I think, is why a lot of people are drawn to her.
On some of the woke stuff, yes. And she certainly makes the right noises when she makes the speeches. So of the best, she is the best of a bad bunch.
What's her tax policy? That's what I want to know.
That would be interesting. I think most of the front runners are looking to cut taxes, as far as I can tell from the debates that I've seen, except Rishi is not particularly enthusiastic about cutting taxes. In fact, let's go to here. He says that we need to focus on inflation before tax cuts after attacking the leadership rival's fairy tale plans. Now, what he's saying is that we can't cut taxes right now, because if we cut the taxes, then people will have more money to spend on stuff. Therefore, it will create more inflation, and the problem will just arise again, which I'll explain why that is not exactly the case as we go on. But he says he's insisted that inflation must be brought under control before the government can consider cutting taxes. This is the inflation, of course, that Rishi himself had a massive role in creating in the first place, given that he printed unprecedented amounts of money, just like happened in America, and also gave many, many businesses bailouts to avoid them from closing down because of the lockdowns that his party helped start in the first place. So a lot of this, as you might be able to tell, seems rather circular. Hence why you should never trust any government trying to interfere in the economy in the first place. Neoliberal economics is a disaster and creates a worse world for literally everybody. Anyway, so in the first TV leadership debate on Friday, he attacked calls by his rivals for immediate tax cuts paid for by increased borrowing as a fairy tale. And to be fair, I don't think we should be cutting taxes and then increasing borrowing so that we can continue our massive amounts of spending. I think we should be cutting taxes and cutting spending. There is plenty of fat all across the government institution, and especially the welfare and NHS institutions, that really could do with reducing so that, it might save us all a bit of money.
They're spoilt for choice for places to cut, because the state also grew a lot larger throughout the lockdowns as well, didn't they? Because they were trying to do a lot more, and therefore they were spending more money, creating more departments, expanding things. And I hate it. It's so insufferable to have to pay for stuff that makes your life objectively worse.
And that you never asked for, and if you don't pay for it, you get to go to prison for the benefit of it. Hence why I consider personally taxation to be theft.
Absolutely. Hear, hear.
But yes, he also said, I think the number one economic priority we face as a country is inflation. No thanks to you, Sunak. I want to get a grip of inflation because it's what makes everybody poorer. Except for you, of course. Isn't he married to a billionaire?
Yep.
That's great, getting economic advice from somebody who never has to face the consequences of his own terrible economic decision. Why was this man put in charge of our money? I swear to God. Anyway, if we don't get a grip of it now, it will last longer, and that is not a good thing. Once we've done that, I will deliver tax cuts. Anyway, and then we've also got, around this same time, because the mainstream media always likes to gather around one particular candidate that they imagine would probably be the best for them, we've had quite a lot of articles from newspapers, BBC News, Independent, The Guardian, all saying that cutting taxes would actually be really bad for everybody. If you were allowed to keep more of your own money, or hell, I know this would be unthinkable, but we're allowed to keep all of the money you earn yourself without having to have it stolen from you by the government, this would actually be terrible. This would be really bad for everybody, because inflation would go up, because nobody is able to control themselves when they have money. Nobody's able to save money. They would just immediately go and spend it on Rolex and Lamborghinis, and that would just cause more inflation. And you've got this article from the IMF, the International Monetary Foundation, I think it is, saying that actually, if we cut taxes now, it would be a mistake, because of course, who is it that benefits the most from rampant inflation? Is it the little guy at the bottom? No, it is these sorts of people, the sorts of people who are shielded by their institutions, the sorts of people who are deep in bed with politicians, who are going to know when the inflation is going to hit so they can invest accordingly, because never trust these people with anything. Never trust them with anything. But anyway, They say in here, tax cuts are being promised by several of the party leadership hopefuls, but a top official at the International Monetary Fund has warned it would be better to raise them instead. So not only would it be bad to cut taxes, you need to have your taxes raised. See, the public is just too irresponsible with their own money. They might buy things that they actually want or spend it on things that they need, like food. And if we don't allow them to just starve and die out, especially in the extreme heat, then how are we going to get the population reduction that we want so that we're able to protect the environment?
It's so dumb because tax cuts could be justified not even just on the basis of it's going to make people more monetarily wealthy. Also, if they have more surplus wealth, then they're more likely to invest it in places, creating growth. And it's also more likely to be spent on riskier ventures that might actually make the economy more efficient, and therefore there could be a snowball effect of rapid growth, which would be nice after locking down the country for 2 years.
It would be nice, but the government only likes to consider economic growth that they themselves are directly responsible for, because us plebs on the ground aren't to be trusted with our own money. Mark Flanagan, the head of this organisation, says, I think debt finance tax cuts at this point would be a mistake. While the former Chancellor Rishi Sunak has argued against cutting taxes, other candidates have touted promises including cuts to the basic rate of income tax and further cuts on fuel duty, because, of course, one of the other things that is really hitting people in the wallet right now is the massive amounts of tax put on fuel, the massive amount of added tax put onto things like your electricity bill. I think for electricity bills, it's like a 25% extra tax purely for, environmental and government responsibility or something like that. I forget the exact name for it. But it's absolutely ridiculous how they try and hit us in the wallet every single time, tell us it's for our own good, and then try and fix the problems that they cause by just doing more of the same. It's absolutely ridiculous that anybody would trust these people with anything. If they weren't in the public sector, if they weren't able to use their charisma to be able to basically trick people into getting them into positions of power, these people would be destitute and on the street, and rightfully so, as far as I'm concerned. These people are leeches and parasites to society that, if ideally, if possible, should be removed from society, as far as I'm concerned. To say any more might get us taken off of YouTube, so I'll be careful. But anyway, tax breaks could offer some relief for households struggling to cope with the steepest increase in food and energy bills in decades. The IMF is among the groups predicting the UK could see the slowest growth and most painful inflation of any G7 nation in 2023, thanks in part to reliance on fossil fuels, a big driver of inflation. Once again, there you go, right there. We, as the plebs, are far too involved, far too reliant on these fossil fuels to, get us from A to B, to be able to drive ourselves to maybe holiday destinations, maybe even just get us to our jobs, which is why we've been naughty.
Did you say reliance on fossil fuels caused inflation?
That's what they are suggesting.
That's written down in this article.
That is what they are suggesting, yes.
Not printing all of the money. No, it's reliance on fossil fuels, obviously.
Not bailing out multiple organisations again and again and again.
Well, I must have missed that bit. Like when I was looking at inflation and causes of, fossil fuels, when I was reading all of those economic books.
Well, no, I guess we've just not been reading the right ones. We've been reading the ones that actually tell you something about the world, rather than just tell you what the author wants you to think.
That's just such a naked political agenda being pushed there.
It really is. However, Mr. Flanagan said tax cuts could be misguided and might even boost inflation by strengthening spending. Money raised through tax, he argued, could instead be used to invest in the country's long-term future. Because once again, you and I cannot be entrusted with our own money to invest in what we think would be useful for us or a good venture for other people. No, it has to be the government spending your money. And once again, I said I was going to refer here to Henry Hazlitt. I've got a nice quote here. Under such circumstances, it is highly improbable that the projects thought up by bureaucrats will provide the same net addition to wealth and welfare per dollar expended as would have been provided by the taxpayers themselves if they had been individually permitted to buy or have made what they themselves wanted instead of being forced to surrender part of their earnings to the state. Puts it nice and succinctly. And let's just remind ourselves that Sunak himself has been the driver of a lot of this inflation. He has been at the helm of the UK economy, being the Chancellor. Chancellor Exchequer, I think is the official title for it, during lockdowns, something the Tory government put in, which were basically an unknown quantity what they would do to the economy. I mean, we all knew what they would do to the economy would destroy it, but they were an unknown quantity as to whether they would actually help with COVID. They would actually help the numbers. And as far as I can tell, I think we can say this on YouTube, seeing as that people are actually reporting on this now. The studies that are coming in show that they basically had no effect. No positive net effect on rates of death, rates of infection, anything like that. So it just destroyed our economy for no reason. Well, unless you're thinking about any particular globalist agendas that might be furthered by consolidating power in a few lofty positions in government. Very interesting, but here we go. UK economy warning. This is from March of last year. Inflation could rise sharply, threatening Sunak's recovery plan. He was at the front during that. And let's also remind ourselves of the next one. This was from last year as well, where Sunak in the Omicron, as the Omicron breakout was about to happen, was also talking about bailing out lots of companies, and he absolutely did. He has consistently done this. He has printed money to support businesses that the government put in peril in the first place with lockdowns.
The thing is, the Omicron variant wasn't even that bad. I had it, and it was not even as bad as like your regular cold. I was just like, is this really COVID? This is ridiculous.
No, it was ridiculous. But of course, we needed to lock down again, and therefore we needed to bail out some companies that would have gone out of business because of the lockdown. So therefore, we needed to do a £1 billion bailout for all of these companies.
Of course.
And where did all of that money come from, I wonder?
Our pockets, I imagine.
Yes. And once again, referring to Hazlitt, it's not a simple question, as so often supposed, of taking something out of the nation's right-hand pocket to put in its left-hand pocket. The government spenders tell you, for example, that if the national income is $1,500 billion, then federal taxes of $360 billion a year would mean that only 24% of national income is being transferred from private purposes to public purposes. This is to talk as if the country was some sort of was the same sort of unit of pooled resources as a huge corporation, and as if all that were involved were a mere bookkeeping transaction. The government spenders forget that they are taking the money from A in order to pay it to B. Or rather, they know this very well, but while they dilate upon all the benefits of the process to B and all the wonderful things he will have which he would not have had if the money had not been transferred to him, they forget the effects of the transactions on A. B is seen, A is forgotten. And you and I, the plebs, the lowly people on the ground having to struggle our ways through life, we're A. We're the ones who are being left behind and forgotten. And that we've even had people from former Tory leaders criticising his economic policy and calling him out on stuff like this, which is honestly shocking to see somebody who in politics who seems to understand this. It's a pleasant surprise. It is Sir Ian Duncan Smith, of all people, being able to point this out as saying that Sunak had a failure of monetary policy. We've got an inflationary spiral going on. Now we've got war in Ukraine. That's made it worse with regards to energy. But here in the UK, we do have to bear some of the blame for the fact that we have inflation rising on top of all that. And that's down purely to the Bank of England and the Treasury's failure over, I think, monetary policy. First of all, over a year ago, the bank actually kept printing huge sums of money, which has inflated the economy, as well as keeping interest rates low. It was the Treasury that signed off on that money printing, the Chancellor no less. So before they say, oh, it's independent, the Treasury has the right to say no to the money printing, and they didn't. And that's fueled inflation. And then Dominic Raab, who is backing Sunak, told Sky News on Sunday that people saying about cutting taxes is ridiculous. You can't borrow your way out of an inflation crisis. Once again, that's true, which is why we just need to at least slash, I would say, at least probably 50% of all government spending. It's probably completely useless and save us all a lot of money. And then we've got The Economist talking about many British Conservatives now prefer tax cuts to balance budgets, and this is obviously true because guess what? Being not a member of the UK government, I was not in charge of what they spent our tax money on or how much money they printed. I am, however, always affected when they raise taxes. So obviously, people on the ground are not going to care as much about balanced budgets when it's the money that they get from their paycheck that's then stolen away from them that affects them on a day-to-day basis. And then we've got more from the Times talking about unaffordable tax cut pledges. Once again, just trying to create another political reason why we can't be allowed to keep more of our own money. And because, of course, one of the other things to consider is that if we are allowed to have more of our own money, more autonomy, that's less control the state can exert over us. Something important to keep in mind there. Then we've got The Guardian saying that Tories' tax cuts a boost for the wealthy and a drag for the rest of us, because apparently cutting the taxes on poor people doesn't help them. In any way, I'll read another one from Hazlitt here. The larger the percentage of the national income taken by taxes, the greater the deterrent to private. The larger the percentage of national income taken by taxes, the greater the deterrent to private again. When personal incomes are taxed at 50, 60 or 70%, people begin to ask themselves why they should work 6, 8 or 9 months of the year for the government and only 6, 4 or 3 months for themselves and their families. Once again, all of this just puts a massive downward pressure on people's individual productivity and encourages them to be spendthrifts. Go out and just spend the money, not save it, because what point is there? I found this article, The Disadvantages of Tax Cuts, from Sapling, very interesting. They point out that if we have tax cuts, we're not going to be able to have as much entitlement spending. We might have to cut some of the welfare state. Oh
how
dear.
terrible.
We might have to cut back on infrastructure growth. We've already covered that the government is not necessarily the best people to judge.
Quite often they're the worst, actually.
Yeah, I would say 9.99 times out of 10, they are absolutely the worst. We might not be able to pay public servants because there's so many useful public servants out there, and we also may not be able to finance public debt. Once again, Hazlitt says, when your money is taken by a thief, you get nothing in return. When your money is taken through taxes to support needless bureaucrats, precisely the same situation exists. We are lucky indeed if the needless bureaucrats are mere easygoing loafers. They are more likely today to be energetic reformers, busily discouraging and disrupting production. Translation, ruining your life in some way or another. The last thing I wanted to point out was that all of this worry about the tax cuts causing inflation is basically untrue in the first place. There's this guy, Andrew Lilico, who's been pointing out that tax cuts will not mean higher inflation, they will just mean higher interest rates, and that's actually a good thing for the economy. And Stephen Carson, otherwise known as Radical Liberation, who knows a lot more about economics than I do, has just pointed out that this is correct. And one of the things, obviously, higher interest rates may cause it so that people with debts that they need to repay might find it a little bit more difficult, but there are many benefits of higher interest rates. So, for instance, if you have less taxes, therefore you have more of your money and higher interest rates, then all of a sudden it becomes much, much, much more attractive to just save your money. Which, if you're putting your money in the bank and saving it so you're able to get better interest rates from it, that's not going into the economy and that's not creating inflation. But yes, at the end of the day, don't trust a Tory, don't trust any politician. They all just want to steal your money, and they're going to do that while telling you why it's actually a good thing that you don't get to spend any of your money. Do not trust any of these thieves under any circumstances.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the book clubs we do, this one on Konstantin Kissin's An Immigrant's Love Letter to the West. And if you want to follow what else I'm putting out, you can follow me on Getter at Callum on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.